Who keeps a mother from her daughter's wedding? Her story from NYC. Characters Introduction. As the sunlight streamed through the windows of the quaint New York City apartment, Mrs. Evelyn Brown sat at her kitchen table, a look of determination etched into her tired features. She ran a weathered hand through her short, graying hair, a gesture of both frustration and resignation. The looming presence of her daughter's upcoming wedding weighed heavily on her mind, threatening to overshadow her every waking moment. Evelyn had always been a strong and resilient woman, but the prospect of her daughter, Rachel, walking down the aisle without her by her side was a painful reality that she was forced to confront. She had raised Rachel as a single mother, sacrificing her own dreams and desires to ensure that her daughter had a better life than she ever did. And now, as Rachel's big day approached, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice at the thought of being excluded from such a momentous occasion. Rachel, on the other hand, was a fiercely independent and headstrong young woman, determined to carve out her own path in life. She had always been close to her mother, but as the wedding drew nearer, tensions began to rise between them. Rachel's insistence on keeping certain details of the wedding a secret from Evelyn only served to exacerbate the growing rift between them. As Evelyn stared out the window at the bustling city streets below, her mind wandered back to the day Rachel was born. She remembered the overwhelming rush of love and joy she had felt as she held her newborn daughter in her arms for the first time. She had made a promise to herself that day, a promise to always be there for Rachel no matter what. But now, as the reality of their estranged relationship loomed before her, Evelyn couldn't help but feel as though she had failed in keeping that promise. Despite their differences, Evelyn knew that she had to find a way to mend things with Rachel before it was too late. She couldn't bear the thought of missing out on such a significant moment in her daughter's life, no matter how strained their relationship had become. With a newfound sense of determination, Evelyn made up her mind to reach out to Rachel and attempt to mend their fractured bond. And so, as the sun began to set over the city skyline, Evelyn picked up the phone and dialed Rachel's number. The sound of her daughter's voice on the other end brought a flood of emotions rushing to the surface, and Evelyn struggled to find the right words to say. But as they talked, a sense of understanding began to form between them, a glimmer of hope for a reconciliation that seemed almost within reach. As they said their goodbyes, Evelyn felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a sense of relief washing over her like a warm embrace. She knew that their journey towards reconciliation would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt a sense of hope that she and Rachel could find their way back to each other. And as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she would once again be by her daughter's side, celebrating the joyous occasion of her wedding day. A mother's devotion. As the first light of dawn peeked through the curtains of her small Queens apartment, Maria felt her heart flutter with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Today was the day of her daughter Sophia's wedding, a day that should have been filled with joy and celebration. But for Maria, there was a shadow that loomed over this momentous occasion. With trembling hands, Maria carefully smoothed out the delicate lace of Sophia's wedding gown, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The dress was a masterpiece of intricate beadwork and flowing silk, a testament to the love and care that had gone into preparing for this day. But as Maria stared at the dress, all she could think about was the absence of the most important person in Sophia's life, her father. It had been 5 years since Carlos had walked out on Maria and Sophia, leaving them both with a void that seemed to grow bigger with each passing day. Maria had done her best to fill that void, to be both mother and father to Sophia, but she knew that nothing could replace the bond a daughter shared with her father. As Maria carefully hung up the wedding gown, she couldn't help but remember the day Sophia had picked it out. They had spent hours in the bridal shop, trying on dress after dress, until Sophia had finally emerged from the dressing room in the gown that took Maria's breath away. The look of sheer happiness on Sophia's face had been enough to make Maria forget, if only for a moment, the pain of Carlos's absence. But now, as Maria stood in the quiet apartment, the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. Sophia was about to embark on a new chapter of her life, one that should have been shared with both her parents. And yet here Maria was, alone and struggling to keep her composure. As the hours ticked by, Maria threw herself into the final preparations for the wedding. She arranged bouquets of roses and lilies, set out plates of pastel-colored macarons, and made sure that every detail was perfect. But with each task completed, the weight of Carlos's absence grew heavier, threatening to crush her spirit. When the time came for Maria to help Sophia into her wedding gown, she felt her heart constrict with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Sophia looked radiant, her eyes shining with happiness and anticipation. But as Maria fastened the buttons on the back of the gown, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As the strains of the wedding march filled the air, Maria took a deep breath and linked her arm through Sophia's, ready to walk her down the aisle. The sanctuary was filled with the soft glow of candlelight, casting a warm and intimate glow over the ceremony. But as Maria looked out at the sea of faces, all she could see was the empty space where Carlos should have been standing. As Sophia exchanged vows with her groom, Maria felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. She was proud of her daughter, proud of the woman she had become. But she couldn't shake the sense of loss that threatened to consume her. As the tears streamed down her cheeks, Maria knew that no amount of love or devotion could fill the void that Carlos had left behind. And yet, as she watched Sophia and her new husband exchange rings and seal their vows with a kiss, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. She may not have been able to keep Carlos from his daughter's wedding, but she had been there for Sophia every step of the way. And as Sophia's radiant smile lit up the room, Maria knew that her love would always be enough to see her through any challenge that lay ahead. The conflict begins. As the sun dipped below the New York City skyline, casting a warm golden glow over the bustling streets, Sophie felt a tightening knot of anxiety in her chest. Her daughter Emma's wedding was just days away, and the tension between them had reached a breaking point. The conflict had been simmering for months, ever since Emma had announced her engagement to Robert, a successful lawyer from a prestigious family. Sophie had always imagined her daughter marrying someone more artistic, more free-spirited, more like herself. But Emma had fallen in love with Robert, and nothing Sophie said could change that. As Sophie entered the elegant penthouse apartment where Emma and Robert were planning their wedding, she couldn't help but feel like an intruder in her own daughter's life. The room was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the soft strains of classical music, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Emma's eyes met Sophie's, and for a moment, something flickered between them, a mix of love, frustration, and longing. "I'm glad you could make it, Mom," Emma said softly, gesturing for Sophie to take a seat on the plush velvet couch. Sophie forced a smile, trying to push aside the hurt and resentment that threatened to consume her. She knew she needed to be supportive, to put aside her feelings and focus on her daughter's happiness. But it was so hard when every moment felt like a battle, a reminder of all the ways their relationship had frayed and splintered over the years. As Emma and Robert went over the final details of the wedding, Sophie tried to keep her focus on the task at hand. She listened as they discussed flower arrangements and seating charts, tried to offer suggestions and help where she could. But with every word she spoke, it felt like she was walking on thin ice, one wrong step away from shattering the fragile peace they had managed to build. When Emma mentioned that Robert's parents would be arriving in a few days, Sophie felt a surge of panic rise in her throat. She had never met Robert's parents, and the thought of facing them, of trying to fit into their world, their expectations, filled her with a deep sense of dread. She knew they were wealthy and powerful, with connections and influence that dwarfed anything she could offer. What could she, a struggling artist from a working-class background, possibly have in common with them? As the evening wore on, Sophie found herself retreating into the shadows, watching as Emma and Robert laughed and smiled, their love shining bright and untouchable. She felt like an outsider, a ghost haunting the edges of their perfect life. How had it come to this, she wondered, that her own daughter had become a stranger to her? As the night drew to a close, Sophie stood to leave, her heart heavy with the weight of all the things left unsaid. Emma hugged her tightly, whispering words of love and gratitude in her ear. Sophie clung to her daughter, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, feeling the distance between them like a chasm she could never hope to cross. And as she walked out into the cool night air, the city lights glittering around her, she knew that the conflict between them was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Seeking solutions. As the morning sun filtered through the curtains of Clara's cozy Manhattan apartment, she sat at her small kitchen table, staring blankly at the pile of wedding invitations in front of her. Her daughter, Hannah, was getting married in just 2 short months, and the excitement and joy that usually accompanied such a momentous occasion were replaced with a deep sense of sadness and longing. Clara had been estranged from her daughter for over a year now, the result of a series of misunderstandings and hurtful words exchanged in the heat of an argument. Hannah had made it clear that she didn't want her mother at the wedding, and Clara had spent countless sleepless nights trying to figure out how to mend their fractured relationship. But today was different. Today, Clara was determined to find a solution, to bridge the divide that had grown between them. She picked up her phone and dialed Hannah's number, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for her daughter to pick up. "Hello?" Hannah's voice was cold and distant, a stark contrast to the warm, loving tone Clara remembered from their past conversations. "Hannah, it's me, it's your mother," Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I know we've had our differences, but I can't bear the thought of not being there for you on your wedding day. Please, let's talk, let's try to work things out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Clara held her breath, hoping against hope that Hannah would soften, that she would be willing to give their relationship another chance. Finally, Hannah spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. I don't know, Mom. It's been so hard, and I just don't know if I can trust you again." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and she squeezed them shut, willing herself to stay strong, to keep fighting for her daughter. "I understand, Hannah, I really do. But please, give me a chance to make things right. Let's meet, let's talk, let's try to find a way forward together." After what felt like an eternity, Hannah agreed to meet Clara for lunch the next day, and Clara hung up the phone, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her. She knew that this was just the first step in a long and difficult journey, but she was determined to do whatever it took to repair their fractured relationship. The next day, Clara arrived at the small cafe where she and Hannah had agreed to meet, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the room for her daughter. And then, there she was, sitting at a table in the corner, looking both nervous and apprehensive. As Clara approached, Hannah looked up, their eyes meeting for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The emotions that washed over Clara were overwhelming: love, regret, hope, fear, all swirling together in a tangled mess. They sat in silence for a moment, neither of them quite sure where to begin. And then, Clara took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady and sure. "Hannah, I know I've made mistakes, and I know that I've hurt you. I'm not proud of the way things have turned out between us, but I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. I would do anything to make things right between us, to be there for you on your wedding day, to be the mother you deserve." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, taking Clara's hand in hers. "I love you too, Mom," she whispered. "I've missed you so much, and I want things to be different between us." I want us to find a way forward, together." And in that moment, as the weight of their past mistakes and regrets lifted off their shoulders, Clara and Hannah knew that they had found the solution they had been seeking, not in grand gestures or elaborate plans, but in the simple act of reaching out to one another, of admitting their faults and their fears, of opening their hearts to the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. As they sat there, talking and crying and laughing together, the warmth of their renewed connection spreading between them like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds, Clara knew that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, no matter what challenges they would face, she would always be there for her daughter, ready and willing to do whatever it took to keep their bond strong and unbreakable. And as they left the cafe that day, hand in hand, hearts full of promise and hope, Clara felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over her, knowing that their journey was just beginning, and that their love would carry them through whatever trials and tribulations lay ahead. The daughter's perspective. The sun was just beginning to set over the iconic skyline of New York City as I stepped out of the bustling streets and into the serene oasis of Central Park. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming cherry blossoms, and the sound of birds chirping in the trees provided a comforting soundtrack to my hurried footsteps. I was on my way to meet my mother for a pre-wedding dress fitting, but my mind was consumed with conflicting emotions. As I made my way through the park, memories of my childhood flooded back to me. I remembered the countless times my mother had taken me here to play, pushing me on the swings and laughing as we shared ice cream cones on hot summer days. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by the hurt and betrayal that had driven a wedge between us. The rift between my mother and I had slowly developed over the years, fueled by misunderstandings and unspoken grievances. I had always been the independent and rebellious one, eager to forge my own path and unwilling to conform to the expectations my mother had set for me. She, on the other hand, felt abandoned and rejected, unable to understand why her daughter was pushing her away. As I approached the quaint little dress shop nestled in a corner of the park, I could see my mother waiting for me outside. She looked so small and fragile, a far cry from the strong and vibrant woman I remembered from my childhood. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but I could see the sadness and longing that lingered behind them. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her after all this time. But then I reminded myself of the love that still bound us together, no matter how strained our relationship had become. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards her, determined to bridge the gap that had formed between us. As we embraced, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a feeling of forgiveness and understanding that had eluded us for so long. Inside the dress shop, the air was heavy with the scent of roses and lace. The sound of soft music played in the background, creating a soothing atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the tension that lingered between my mother and I. The seamstress greeted us warmly, leading us to a dressing room where a beautiful white gown awaited me. As I slipped into the dress, I couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly it fit me. The intricate lace and delicate beading sparkled in the soft light, making me feel like a princess in a fairy tale. But as I twirled in front of the mirror, admiring my reflection, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that gnawed at my heart. I knew that my mother had always dreamed of seeing me in a beautiful wedding gown, walking down the aisle towards a future filled with love and happiness. And yet, as I stood there in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if she would even be there to witness it. The thought filled me with a sense of sorrow and regret, a longing for the mother-daughter bond that had been fractured beyond repair. But as I turned to face my mother, her eyes filled with tears and her hands trembling with emotion, I knew that there was still hope for us. In that moment, we both realized that the love we shared was stronger than the pain that had driven us apart. And as we embraced once more, a sense of healing and reconciliation washed over us, paving the way for a future filled with forgiveness and understanding. As we left the dress shop and made our way back to the bustling streets of New York City, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets. But in that moment, all I could see was the light of love that shone between my mother and I, illuminating the path towards a future where nothing could keep a mother from her daughter's wedding. The weight of tradition. A hush fell over the crowded New York City apartment as the matriarch of the family entered the room. Alice, a woman in her late 70s, carried herself with a quiet grace that demanded attention and respect from all those around her. Her white hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her lined face showed the wisdom and strength that had carried her through a lifetime of trials and triumphs. The room was filled with the sounds of laughter and chatter as family and friends mingled, preparing for the upcoming wedding of Alice's beloved granddaughter, Lily. But as soon as Alice appeared, a sense of solemnity settled over the gathering. It was as if her mere presence commanded a reverence for the weight of tradition that she carried on her shoulders. Alice made her way to the center of the room, where a small table stood holding a collection of photographs and mementos from her own wedding day many decades ago. As she gazed down at the images of her younger self, a wave of nostalgia washed over her, bringing with it a flood of memories of love, loss, and sacrifice. The weight of tradition hung heavy in the air as Alice began to speak, her voice soft yet filled with a steely determination that brooked no argument. She spoke of the long line of strong women that had come before her, each one carrying the burdens of their families and communities with grace and dignity. She spoke of the sacrifices they had made, the dreams they had deferred, and the resilience they had shown in the face of adversity. As Alice recounted the stories of her ancestors, the room fell silent, each person hanging on her every word. She spoke of her own journey as a young woman, leaving behind her family in the rural South to forge a new life in the bustling metropolis of New York City. She spoke of the challenges she had faced, the obstacles she had overcome, and the triumphs she had celebrated along the way. But as the wedding day approached, Alice found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, she was overjoyed at the prospect of her granddaughter finding love and happiness. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her heart. As Alice looked around the room at the smiling faces of her family and friends, she was struck by a sudden realization. She saw herself reflected in the eyes of her granddaughter, a young woman on the cusp of a new chapter in her life. And in that moment, Alice understood the true weight of tradition, the responsibility to pass down the stories, values, and lessons of the past to the generations that would come after. With a renewed sense of purpose, Alice made her decision. She would stand by her granddaughter on her wedding day, a beacon of strength and wisdom in a world that often felt uncertain and chaotic. And as she watched Lily walk down the aisle, a vision of beauty and grace, Alice knew that she had done her duty, not just as a mother, but as a keeper of tradition and a guardian of the family legacy. The weight of tradition was a burden that Alice carried with pride, knowing that in passing it on to her granddaughter, she was ensuring that the stories of their ancestors would live on for generations to come. And as she watched the newlyweds exchange vows and seal their love with a kiss, Alice felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing that she had fulfilled her duty to her family and to herself. The influence of family. As the sun began to set over the skyline of New York City, the bustling streets below were filled with the sounds of honking horns and hurried footsteps. But amidst the chaos of the city, there was a quiet and somber moment unfolding in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Inside the dimly lit living room, Maria sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, staring out the window with a heavy heart. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated her tear-streaked face, revealing the pain and longing that filled her soul. It had been years since she had seen her daughter, Isabella, and the ache of their separation weighed heavily on her aging shoulders. As she traced her fingertips along the edge of a faded photograph, Maria's mind drifted back to a time when she and Isabella were inseparable. They would spend hours exploring the city together, laughing and sharing secrets under the watchful gaze of the Statue of Liberty. But as Isabella grew older, their bond began to fray, torn apart by misunderstandings and unspoken words. In the corner of the room, a small wooden table held a collection of trinkets and mementos from Isabella's childhood. Maria picked up a delicate silver locket and clutched it to her chest, remembering the day she had given it to her daughter on her 18th birthday. It was a symbol of their unbreakable bond, a reminder that no matter where life took them, they would always be connected. The sound of a key turning in the lock snapped Maria out of her reverie, and she looked up to see her son, Carlos, standing in the doorway. His eyes were filled with concern as he took in his mother's pained expression, knowing all too well the source of her anguish. "Maria, I know this is hard for you," Carlos said softly, crossing the room to kneel beside her. "But we have to be strong. Isabella's wedding is tomorrow, and we have to find a way to be there for her." Maria's heart clenched at the mention of her daughter's wedding. The thought of Isabella standing at the altar without her by her side was a dagger to her soul, reminding her of all the missed moments and lost opportunities. "It's not fair, Carlos," Maria whispered, her voice barely above a hoarse whisper. "Why does she keep me from her special day? What did I do to deserve this?" Carlos reached out and grasped his mother's hand, his touch warm and comforting. "Isabella has her reasons, Maria," he said gently. "We may never understand them, but we have to respect her choices. All we can do is show her that we love her, no matter what." Maria nodded, her resolve hardening as she wiped away her tears. She knew that Carlos was right, her daughter's happiness was all that mattered, even if it meant sacrificing her own desires. Rising to her feet, Maria squared her shoulders and took a deep breath, determined to be the mother Isabella needed her to be. The night passed in a blur of restless sleep and anxious anticipation, until the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, signaling the arrival of a new day. Maria dressed carefully in her best dress, smoothing out the wrinkles with trembling hands. Carlos stood by her side, a steady presence in the midst of her turmoil. As they made their way to the church where Isabella's wedding would take place, Maria felt a mix of emotions swirling within her, sadness, regret, but also a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be the beginning of a new chapter in their fractured relationship, a chance to mend what had been broken. The church was filled with the soft strains of music and the scent of fresh flowers, creating a sacred atmosphere that enveloped them in its embrace. Maria clutched Carlos's arm tightly as they entered the sanctuary, their eyes searching for a glimpse of Isabella among the crowd. And there she was, radiant in a gown of ivory lace, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon. Isabella's eyes met Maria's from across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that fleeting instant, mother and daughter were reunited in a bond that transcended words, their hearts speaking the language of love. As Isabella made her way down the aisle on the arm of her father, Maria felt a tear roll down her cheek, carrying with it the weight of years of longing and regret. But as she watched her daughter exchange vows with the man she loved, a sense of peace settled over her, blanketing her in a warmth she had almost forgotten. In that moment, Maria knew that no matter what had come between them in the past, their love would endure. And as Isabella turned to her with a smile that lit up the room, Maria realized that nothing could keep a mother from her daughter's wedding, not distance, not time, not even the pain of the past. For in the end, love would always find a way to bridge the divide and bring them back together. Navigating expectations. Alice felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her as she sat in her small apartment in New York City, trying to navigate the overwhelming expectations placed upon her as the mother of the bride. Her daughter, Emily, was getting married in just a few short weeks, and the pressure to fulfill her role as the supportive and dutiful mother was weighing heavily on her shoulders. As she looked around her cluttered apartment, filled with wedding magazines, fabric swatches, and to-do lists, Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of panic creeping in. The enormity of the task ahead of her seemed insurmountable, from coordinating the seating arrangements to choosing the perfect mother of the bride dress. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of the world. Alice's mind drifted back to the day Emily had announced her engagement. The joy and excitement in her daughter's voice had been palpable, and Alice had been overwhelmed with happiness for her. But as the reality of the wedding planning process set in, she realized that her expectations of what the day would be like were far different from the reality. She had always imagined herself by Emily's side throughout the entire process, offering guidance, support, and love every step of the way. But as the weeks passed, she found herself constantly butting heads with her daughter over every little detail, from the flowers to the music to the guest list. It seemed as though Emily had a clear vision of what she wanted her wedding to be, and Alice felt as though her opinions and suggestions were constantly being dismissed. The pressure to meet the expectations of being the perfect mother of the bride was suffocating. Alice felt as though she was being pulled in a million different directions, trying to please everyone: her daughter, her ex-husband, her own friends and family. The weight of their expectations was crushing her, leaving her feeling lost and overwhelmed. She looked out the window of her apartment, staring out at the bustling city below. The honking horns and sirens seemed to mock her, reminding her of the chaos and noise that consumed her life. She longed for a moment of peace, a moment to breathe and gather her thoughts, but it felt impossibly out of reach. As the days passed and the wedding drew closer, Alice found herself withdrawing further and further into herself. She felt disconnected from the world around her, as though she were floating through a fog of confusion and uncertainty. The once vibrant and energetic woman she had been seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a shadow of her former self. On the day of the final dress fitting, Alice struggled to hold back the tears as she admired her reflection in the mirror. The dress was beautiful, elegant, and perfectly suited for the occasion, but as she looked at herself, all she could see were the expectations and pressures that had consumed her. She felt as though she were wearing a mask, hiding her true emotions and fears from the world. As she left the dress shop and made her way back to her apartment, a sense of resignation settled over her. She knew that she couldn't continue to live under the weight of everyone else's expectations. She needed to find a way to reclaim her own sense of self, to rediscover the woman she had once been before the wedding planning had consumed her life. And so, as she sat in her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the chaos that had consumed her, Alice made a decision. She would no longer allow the expectations of others to dictate her actions. She would find a way to navigate the tumultuous waters of wedding planning on her own terms, reclaiming her sense of self and finding the strength to be true to herself, no matter the cost. A mother's journey. The morning of the wedding dawned with a golden hue, painting the streets of New York City with a warm glow that promised a day filled with magic and joy. The city that never sleeps seemed to hush its bustling energy for just a moment, allowing the sweet anticipation of the impending ceremony to seep into the air like a gentle whisper. But for one woman, the mother of the bride, the day held a different kind of weight, a different kind of beauty. As she stood in front of the mirror, carefully adjusting the delicate lace of her dress, she couldn't help but feel a wave of nostalgia wash over her. How quickly time had slipped through her fingers, like grains of sand in an hourglass, until this moment, this pivotal moment where she would watch her daughter walk down the aisle and begin a new chapter of her life. A tear threatened to spill from her eye, but she quickly blinked it away, determined to keep her composure and savor every second of this day. She made her way to the church, her steps light but deliberate, her heart a mix of excitement and longing. The church was bathed in sunlight, the stained glass windows casting colorful patterns on the pews, creating a kaleidoscope of memories and dreams. The scent of fresh flowers danced in the air, mingling with the soft strains of music that filled the space with a sense of reverence and celebration. As she took her seat, surrounded by family and friends, she felt a surge of pride and gratitude swell within her chest. The love and support that enveloped her in that moment was like a warm embrace, a reminder that she was not alone, that she had raised a daughter who was cherished and adored by so many. She held on to that thought like a lifeline, a beacon of light in the midst of her swirling emotions. And then, the doors of the church swung open, and there she was, her daughter, radiant and resplendent in her wedding gown. The mother felt her breath catch in her throat, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of her daughter's beauty and grace. She watched as her daughter made her way down the aisle, her eyes shining with love and anticipation, her smile lighting up the room like a beacon of hope. The ceremony was a blur of emotion and joy, of promises spoken and vows exchanged. The mother listened with a heart overflowing with love and pride as her daughter and son-in-law declared their commitment to each other, their voices trembling with emotion and sincerity. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, unbidden but welcomed, a testament to the depth of her emotions in that moment. And then, as the ceremony drew to a close and the newlyweds shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the mother felt a sense of peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She knew that her daughter was in good hands, that she would be cherished and protected by the man she had chosen to spend her life with. And as they turned to face their guests, their faces glowing with happiness and love, the mother couldn't help but whisper a silent prayer of gratitude for this moment, for this day that would be etched in her heart forever. As the reception began and the guests mingled and danced, the mother found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the room, where she could watch her daughter and son-in-law from afar. She watched as they laughed and danced, their love shining like a beacon in the dimly lit room, and she couldn't help but smile, her heart brimming with happiness and contentment. But amidst the joy and celebration, a pang of sadness tugged at her heart, a reminder of the one who was missing from this special day. The absence of her own mother, who had passed away years ago, cast a shadow over the festivities, a reminder of the bittersweet cycle of life and love. And yet, in that moment, surrounded by her family and friends, the mother felt a sense of peace and closure, a reassurance that even in death, love endures, and that her mother's spirit was watching over her, blessing her on this special day. And so, as the night wore on and the celebrations continued, the mother found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, a tapestry of joy and sorrow, of love and loss. But through it all, she held on to the memory of her daughter's wedding day, a day that marked a new beginning, a new chapter in their lives, a day that she would carry with her, in her heart, forever. Discovering strength. As the sun began to set over the Manhattan skyline, Emily found herself sitting alone in her small apartment, surrounded by boxes of mementos from the past. The room was filled with the remnants of a life she had once known, now reduced to memories that seemed to haunt her every waking moment. She had always prided herself on being a strong and independent woman, but as she sat there in the dimly lit room, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her circumstances bearing down on her. The upcoming wedding of her daughter, Sarah, was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration of love and new beginnings. But for Emily, it had become a source of pain and sadness, a reminder of all the things she had lost along the way. She had worked so hard to provide for Sarah, to give her the perfect life that she never had, only to be cast aside when she was no longer needed. As she sifted through the boxes, she came across a faded black and white photograph of herself on her own wedding day. She traced the outlines of her younger self, her eyes filled with hope and optimism for the future. How had she gone from that young and vibrant woman to the broken and defeated soul she had become? Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about the years of sacrifice and hardship she had endured. The long hours at work, the sleepless nights worrying about bills and finances, the constant struggle to keep up appearances and provide for her daughter. She had given everything she had, only to be left with nothing in return. But as she sat there, lost in her thoughts, a flicker of something stirred within her. A spark of resilience and determination that had been buried deep beneath the weight of her sorrow. She was tired of feeling sorry for herself, tired of letting the past dictate her future. It was time to take back control of her life, to rediscover the strength that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed. With newfound determination, Emily rose from her seat and began to unpack the boxes with renewed purpose. Each item she unearthed held a piece of her past, a reminder of the joy and pain she had experienced along the way. But instead of allowing them to drag her down, she embraced them as a part of her journey, a testament to her resilience and fortitude. As the night wore on, Emily's small apartment was transformed into a battlefield of memories and emotions. But she was no longer a passive observer of her own life, she was an active participant, taking charge and making decisions that were long overdue. She set aside the regrets and the what-ifs, focusing instead on the present moment and the strength that had been lying dormant within her all along. When the sun rose the next morning, Emily emerged from her apartment a changed woman. Her eyes were no longer clouded with tears, but filled with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on, armed with the strength and resilience that had been waiting to be unleashed. And as she stood on the threshold of a new beginning, ready to attend her daughter's wedding and face the demons of her past, Emily knew that she was no longer the woman who had been broken and defeated. She was a survivor, a fighter, a force to be reckoned with. And no one, not even her own doubts and fears, could keep her from finding the strength within herself. The power of love. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sense of anticipation that hung heavy in the air. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the city that never sleeps. In a small apartment in New York City, Maria sat at the window, her hands trembling as she sipped at a cup of strong coffee. The aroma of the freshly brewed drink wafted through the room, mixing with the scent of roses that adorned the table. Maria could hear the city coming to life outside her window. The distant sound of car horns blaring, the chatter of pedestrians on the streets below, and the occasional siren wailing in the distance. But all these sounds seemed to fade into the background as she sat there, lost in her own thoughts. She thought back to the day her daughter, Sophia, had first told her she was getting married. The joy and excitement in Sophia's eyes had been infectious, and Maria had felt a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest. But now, as the day of the wedding drew closer, Maria's heart was heavy with a mix of emotions. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her, like a dark cloud looming on the horizon. It wasn't just nervousness about the wedding itself, but a deeper fear that had rooted itself in her heart. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, that the happiness of this day would be overshadowed by something sinister. As she looked out at the bustling city below, Maria's mind wandered to the distant memories of her own wedding day. The way her husband had looked at her with love and adoration, the promise they had made to each other to weather any storm that came their way. But that promise had been broken long ago, shattered by betrayal and heartache. Maria's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door. She rose slowly from her seat, her heart pounding in her chest as she made her way to answer it. Standing on the other side was Sophia, her eyes sparkling with excitement and nerves. "Mom, are you ready?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Maria forced a smile onto her face, trying to push aside the heavy weight of her emotions. "Of course, Mija," she replied, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "Let's make this the happiest day of your life." As they made their way to the venue, Maria couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding creeping up on her. The streets of New York City seemed to blur past her, the honking of cars and the chatter of crowds becoming a distant hum in her ears. When they arrived at the venue, Maria was struck by the grandeur of the place. The room was filled with the soft glow of twinkling fairy lights, the tables adorned with fragrant flowers and flickering candles. The air was thick with the sound of laughter and music, a joyous symphony that filled the room. But despite the festivities around her, Maria felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. She watched as Sophia danced with her husband-to-be, her eyes shining with happiness. And yet, there was a nagging feeling in Maria's chest, a sense of dread that wouldn't dissipate. As the night wore on, Maria found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the room. She watched as Sophia and her husband shared their first dance, their love evident in every graceful movement. A tear slipped down Maria's cheek as she realized that her daughter was all grown up now, starting a new chapter in her life. But just as she tried to push aside her fears and immerse herself in the joy of the moment, a figure caught her eye. Standing in the shadows at the edge of the room was a woman, her face twisted in a grimace of anger and resentment. Maria's heart stopped as she recognized the woman standing there, her own mother. The woman who had once been her rock, her source of comfort and support. But now, there was only bitterness and betrayal in her eyes. Maria felt a chill run down her spine as her mother made her way towards her. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the music fading into a distant echo as the two women stood face to face. "You should have never married him," her mother spat, her voice filled with venom. "You should have stayed with me, where you belonged." Maria felt a wave of anger wash over her, pushing aside the fear that had gripped her heart. "I made my choice, Mother," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "And I will not let you ruin this day for me and my daughter." As her mother turned to leave, Maria felt a sense of relief wash over her. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest lifted, replaced by a sense of resolve. She turned back to the joyous celebration around her, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. In that moment, Maria realized the power of love. The love that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life, the love that had sustained her through loss and heartache. And now, as she watched her daughter dance the night away, Maria knew that love would always triumph over darkness. And nothing would keep her from celebrating the happiness of this day. Facing the truth. I stood before the full-length mirror in my small apartment in Brooklyn, smoothing down the fabric of the elegant dress that I had carefully chosen for my daughter's wedding. The deep navy blue silk clung to my curves, accentuating my figure in a way that made me feel both beautiful and vulnerable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the swirling storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. As I brushed a stray strand of silver hair away from my face, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The strained relationship I had with my daughter, the years of missed birthdays and holidays, the harsh words and bitter silences that had become the norm between us. It pained me to admit that so much time had been lost, so many opportunities for reconciliation had slipped through my grasp. But today was different. Today was the day that my daughter was getting married, and I was determined to set aside the past and embrace the possibility of a new beginning. I had hesitated at first, unsure if I even had the right to attend such a momentous occasion after years of absence. But something deep inside me had urged me to face the truth, to confront the pain and regret that had plagued me for so long. As I slipped on my delicate pearl earrings and fastened the clasp of my necklace, I felt a surge of determination coursing through my veins. I was ready to face the truth, whatever it may be. I was ready to confront the hurt and the anger that had driven a wedge between my daughter and me, to lay bare my own mistakes and shortcomings in the hope of rebuilding what had been shattered. I made my way to the elegant venue in the heart of Manhattan, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm. The air was tinged with the scent of fresh flowers and anticipation, and I could hear the soft strains of music drifting through the air. I took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy wooden doors, stepping into a world that seemed suspended in time. The room was bathed in a soft golden light, casting a warm glow over the faces of the guests who had gathered to witness the union of two souls. I scanned the room nervously, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for a familiar face among the crowd. And then I saw her, my daughter, resplendent in her ivory gown, her eyes bright with happiness and love. I felt a lump form in my throat as our eyes met, 1,000 unspoken words passing between us in that fleeting moment. I saw the uncertainty and the longing in her gaze, the shadows of old wounds that still haunted her despite the joyous occasion. And I knew then that it was time to face the truth, to lay bare my heart and soul in front of my daughter, to beg for her forgiveness and understanding. As the ceremony began, I found myself drawn into a whirlwind of emotions, hope and fear, love and regret, all swirling around me in a dizzying dance. I listened to the vows being exchanged, the promises of forever that hung in the air like a fragile thread. And I knew that I had to speak my own truth before it was too late. And so, as the newlyweds turned to face their loved ones, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me, their gazes questioning and expectant. I cleared my throat, my voice steady and strong as I spoke from the depths of my soul. I have spent far too long running from the truth, I began, my words echoing in the hushed room. I have let pride and fear guide my actions, blinding me to the pain that I have caused. But today, on this day of joy and celebration, I stand before you all to face the truth, to confront the mistakes I have made and the love that I have squandered. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I spoke, my voice trembling with emotion. I saw the flicker of recognition in my daughter's eyes, the glimmer of understanding that danced across her face. And in that moment, I knew that I had finally reached her, that my words had pierced the armor of resentment that had long encased her heart. I am sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. I am sorry for all the moments we have lost, for all the words left unsaid. But I am here now, in this moment, ready to face the truth and to rebuild what was broken. Will you forgive me, my daughter? Will you allow me to be a part of your life once more? A heavy silence fell over the room as my words hung in the air, the weight of my confession pressing down on me like a stone. And then, slowly but surely, I saw a smile begin to curve my daughter's lips, a glimmer of hope and forgiveness shining in her eyes. And in that moment, as she stepped forward and enveloped me in a warm embrace, I knew that the truth had set us free. As I held my daughter close, the echoes of our shared pain and regret fading into the distance, I felt a sense of peace settle over me like a comforting embrace. The truth had been spoken, the wounds had been laid bare, and in their place bloomed the tender shoots of reconciliation and renewal. And as I watched my daughter take her place beside her new spouse, her hand clasped in mine, I knew that nothing, not time, not distance, not even the ghosts of the past, could keep a mother from her daughter's wedding. For our story was not defined by the pain of our past, but by the love that would carry us forward into the future, hand in hand, heart to heart. The wedding day approaches. As the days crept closer to the wedding, the city seemed to buzz with excitement. Everywhere you looked, there were hints of the upcoming celebration. Storefronts displayed elegant decorations in shades of ivory and gold, while vendors along the streets offered freshly cut flowers and decadent pastries for the occasion. The air itself felt charged with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath in anticipation of the joyous event. Inside the bustling bridal shop, Mary found herself surrounded by a whirlwind of activity. Seamstresses flitted around her, making last-minute alterations to her daughter's wedding gown, while makeup artists and hairstylists worked their magic to ensure every detail was perfect for the special day. Mary watched on, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and nostalgia. It felt like just yesterday that her daughter was a little girl playing dress-up in her childhood bedroom, and now here she was, a radiant bride-to-be preparing to walk down the aisle. As Mary gazed at her daughter in the mirror, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness tugging at her heart. The wedding day was supposed to be a time of celebration and joy, a culmination of years of love and devotion. But for Mary, it was tinged with a sense of unease, a gnawing worry that threatened to overshadow the happiness of the occasion. Ever since her daughter had announced her engagement, Mary's own mother had been conspicuously absent from the wedding preparations. At first, Mary had brushed it off as a simple misunderstanding, assuming that her aging mother had simply forgotten about the upcoming nuptials. But as the days turned into weeks and the wedding day drew closer, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She tried reaching out to her mother, leaving countless messages and voicemails in the hopes of getting a response. But each attempt was met with silence, leaving Mary feeling lost and helpless. She longed for her mother's reassuring presence, her comforting words that had always been a source of strength during difficult times. But now, when she needed her mother the most, she was nowhere to be found. Despite the mounting anxiety gnawing at her, Mary tried her best to focus on the task at hand. She helped her daughter slip into her gown, smoothing out the delicate fabric and adjusting the veil just so. The transformation was breathtaking, her daughter a vision of beauty and grace that took Mary's breath away. She felt a swell of pride in her chest, a fierce protectiveness that drove her to ensure that her daughter's wedding day would be nothing short of perfect. But as the final touches were being made, Mary's thoughts kept drifting back to her absent mother. The ache in her heart grew with each passing moment, a deep yearning for her mother's presence on this momentous day. She couldn't bear the thought of walking down the aisle without her, of exchanging vows without her mother's loving gaze to witness the union. As the wedding day dawned bright and clear, Mary felt a knot of apprehension twisting in her stomach. The house was a flurry of activity, as family and friends gathered to celebrate the joyous occasion. But amidst the laughter and chatter, there was a palpable absence, a void where her mother's presence should have been. As Mary stood at the threshold of the ceremony, her daughter by her side in all her bridal glory, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. In that moment of stillness, she whispered a silent prayer to the universe, a plea for her mother to be there in spirit if not in person. And as the strains of the wedding march filled the air and the audience rose to their feet, Mary felt a sudden rush of warmth enveloping her, a sense of peace and acceptance washing over her like a gentle wave. In that moment, Mary knew that her mother was with her, watching over her and her daughter with love and pride. And as she took her daughter's hand and walked down the aisle towards her waiting groom, Mary felt a profound sense of gratitude and contentment settling in her heart. For even though her mother may be physically absent, her spirit would always be present, guiding them through this new chapter of their lives with love and wisdom. Reconciliation and forgiveness. As the sunlight filtered through the picturesque stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews, a sense of tranquility descended upon the room. Soft strains of classical music floated through the air, mingling with the gentle whispers of the guests as they took their seats. The scent of fresh flowers wafted from elaborate arrangements adorning the altar, adding a touch of elegance to the intimate ceremony about to unfold. The bride, her face radiant with joy and anticipation, stood at the entrance of the chapel, her eyes fixed on the figure approaching her. It was her mother, clad in a simple yet elegant dress, her usually stern expression softened by a faint smile. For years, there had been a rift between them, a deep chasm of hurt and misunderstandings that seemed impossible to bridge. But today, on this momentous occasion, they had both chosen to set aside their differences and come together in the spirit of reconciliation and forgiveness. As the mother and daughter stood face to face, their eyes met in a silent exchange of emotions too complex to be put into words. The daughter reached out, taking her mother's hands in hers, a gesture of acceptance and reconciliation. The mother, visibly moved by this display of affection, felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes welling up with tears she had long kept suppressed. In that moment, the weight of years of estrangement lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of connection and healing. The officiant, a kindly old man with a gentle voice, began the ceremony with a solemnity befitting the occasion. He spoke of love, forgiveness, and the power of redemption, his words resonating with the guests gathered in the chapel. The bride and groom exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion, their promises to each other a testament to the strength of their bond. And then it was time for the mother to speak. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before addressing her daughter and the assembled guests. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight of sincerity and conviction that drew everyone's attention. "My dear daughter," she began, her eyes locked with her daughter's, "I stand before you today with a heart full of regret and remorse. I have spent so many years letting pride and stubbornness come between us, refusing to see the pain I have caused. But today, in this sacred place, surrounded by our loved ones, I want to lay down my defenses and ask for your forgiveness." Tears streamed down the mother's face as she spoke, her voice quivering with raw emotion. The daughter, her own eyes brimming with tears, reached out to embrace her mother, a gesture of forgiveness and acceptance that spoke volumes more than words ever could. The guests, moved by this display of vulnerability and reconciliation, looked on with tear-filled eyes, their hearts touched by the power of love to heal old wounds. And as the mother and daughter stood locked in a tight embrace, their silhouettes outlined against the backdrop of the chapel, a sense of peace and harmony settled over the room. The music swelled, filling the air with a sense of serenity and grace, a fitting accompaniment to this moment of redemption and renewal. In that chapel, on that day, a mother was finally reunited with her daughter, their hearts intertwined in a bond of love and forgiveness that could never be broken. And as they exchanged tearful smiles and whispered words of reconciliation, they knew that the past was behind them, and that a bright future filled with promise and hope lay ahead. The final celebration. As the guests arrived at the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the air was filled with excitement and anticipation. The room was elegantly decorated with cascading floral arrangements, twinkling fairy lights, and shimmering candles. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast a warm and romantic ambience over the space, creating a magical atmosphere that was perfect for a celebration of love and unity. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the room as friends and family mingled, their faces glowing with happiness and joy. The bride, Sarah, looked radiant in her white lace gown, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she greeted her guests with a bright smile. Her mother, Elizabeth, stood by her side, her eyes filled with pride and love as she watched her daughter prepare to take this momentous step into the next chapter of her life. As the music began to play, the guests took their seats, eagerly awaiting the start of the ceremony. The room fell silent as Sarah walked down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's, her veil trailing behind her like a delicate cloud. Elizabeth's heart swelled with emotion as she watched her daughter's graceful movements, her eyes brimming with tears of love and pride. The ceremony was a heartfelt and touching affair, with the bride and groom exchanging vows that spoke of their deep love and commitment to each other. Elizabeth couldn't help but be moved by the sincerity and devotion in their words, feeling a sense of peace and contentment wash over her as she witnessed the union of two souls in love. As the newlyweds sealed their vows with a kiss, the room erupted into applause and cheers, the sound reverberating off the walls with a joyous energy that was palpable. Sarah and her new husband, James, beamed with happiness as they made their way back up the aisle, their hands entwined in a silent promise of forever. The reception that followed was a whirlwind of music, dancing, and laughter. The guests dined on a sumptuous feast of gourmet cuisine and sipped on champagne as they toasted the happy couple, their faces aglow with the merriment of the occasion. Elizabeth found herself swept up in the festivities, her heart light and free as she danced the night away with friends and family, her worries and fears momentarily forgotten in the joy of the moment. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah and James took to the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The room fell silent as they moved together in perfect harmony, their eyes locked in a gaze of love and adoration that spoke volumes of their deep connection. Elizabeth watched with tears of happiness in her eyes, her heart overflowing with pride and love for her daughter and her new son-in-law. As the final notes of the music faded away, the guests gathered around the happy couple, showering them with hugs, kisses, and well wishes for a lifetime of happiness and love. Elizabeth embraced her daughter tightly, her heart full to bursting with emotion as she whispered words of love and encouragement in her ear. As she watched Sarah and James disappear into the night, hand in hand, Elizabeth felt a sense of peace and fulfillment settle over her. She knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful journey for her daughter, and she vowed to always be there to support and guide her through the ups and downs of life. And as she made her way back to her hotel room that night, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel grateful for the love and joy that had surrounded her on this special day. Who keeps a mother from her daughter's wedding? Not even the darkest of shadows could dim the light of this final celebration.